Is Brian Kelly going to take play calling duties away from Joe Sloan? Oh, we got to talk about this. It's Locked on LSU. Let's get it.
You are Locked on LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, let's get it. It is Locked on LSU, your team every day. I'm your host, Matt Moscona. Thanks so much for making us your first listen. We are free, available wherever you get podcasts, of course, on YouTube as well. So please subscribe. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, where you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Pro Football Focus grades are out for LSU Florida. They watched, so you didn't have to. What is left to play for in 2024? Brian Kelly tackled that after the game. Some interesting comments. But maybe the most interesting part of Brian Kelly's postgame after the loss to Florida was when he was asked about the photo, which is on the thumbnail of today's video. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening on podcasts, I'll describe it for you. It's a photo of Brian Kelly on the sideline with a play sheet in his hand. And Brian Kelly was asked, this was also observed by some of the TV broadcast and those who were there to cover the game. Joe Sloan is LSU's play caller. He's in the booth. Brian Kelly's on the field and has never had a play sheet. And Saturday, he had a play sheet. And so Brian Kelly was asked about it, and he chuckled a little bit and then gave this reply.
I think when things don't go well, the head coach has got to be involved. And that's not to say that I don't have full faith and trust in my staff. I do. But the buck stops with me. You know, when we lose a game, I have to be able to look at the reasons why. And quite frankly, I feel as though in my background and how I was developed as a coach, I feel like it's get involved. And so, yes, I've been more involved in everything that we're doing.
He hesitated to say I've been more involved in play calling, but he said in everything. And listen, Brian Kelly's background, he has been a play caller. He called plays at Central Michigan, he called plays at Cincinnati, and called plays for a time at Notre Dame as well. So, yes, Brian Kelly has experience calling plays. That's fine, and he should be able to lend his experience to assist Joe Sloan. When he chooses to assist Joe Sloan, however, is something that might be a bigger conversation. I'll get to here in just a second because I do have a thought on this, because we've seen this before at LSU, and it did not go well. I'll get to that here in a second, but there was a follow-up asking Brian Kelly to elaborate. And I'm sure they wanted him to acknowledge point blank if he was calling plays or a thing like that, but he chose to keep it more surface level. But here was just for the sake of having all of the information out there, this was Brian Kelly's response to the follow-up.
Anybody that has a business organization and you're not, getting a profit at the, you put yourself on the street, right? Everybody is working, and putting in the time, and the head coach has got to be part of that as well. So whether it's a business or it's football, coaching, you can't sit and say, well, it's the coordinators. I mean, the head coach is ultimately responsible for the success of his football team, and we're not successful these last 3 weeks. And so you got to get involved. And obviously, I wasn't good enough tonight, but we're going to go back to work, and we're going to look at the things that we need to get better at, and we're going to keep swinging, and we're going to have 22 guys out there that are going to fight for LSU and play hard these last 2 weeks at home.
Okay. So I understand completely where he's coming from. You're not having success. The buck stops with the head coach. The head coach needs to get involved in areas where you're not having success. Totally get it. In year one under Brian Kelly, when LSU was really struggling in special teams. Now, we weren't allowed to go watch practice during the season, but a lot of conversations I had were that Brian Kelly was spending all of his time at practice with special teams. LSU needed to get better there. That's what he had to be involved in at practice. And I'm very much okay with that. The problem I have is in the game. Now, let me be clear about this. I am totally fine with the head coach calling plays. Lane Kiffin calls plays. Jeff Levy at Mississippi State calls plays. Lincoln Riley calls plays. Steve Sarkisian calls plays. Josh Heupel, Billy Napier calls the plays for Florida's offense. Ryan Day at Ohio State was the offensive coordinator and play caller, became the head coach, continued calling plays until he hired Chip Kelly, who now calls the plays. But it's common for head coaches to call plays. I have no problem whatsoever with the head coach calling plays if that's what is the best path forward. We've also seen coaches stripped of their play calling duties. It happened in the NFL this year, right, with Nathaniel Hackett with the Jets. It happened last year at Colorado. Deion Sanders stripped Sean Lewis of his play calling duties and elevated Pat Shurmur into that role late in the season. Famously happened back in 2018 at Southern Cal, where T. Martin was stripped of his play calling duties, and Clay Helton, the head coach, who had been a play caller prior, reassumed that role and called plays. It's happened right now at Florida State. This year, Florida State just fired Alex Atkins, their offensive coordinator, and Mike Norvell took over the play calling duties. I'm perfectly fine with that. If Brian Kelly wants to call the plays, okay, he's got a great experience doing it. He knows his team. He knows offense. Fine. I also am not someone who's like pounding the table saying Joe Sloan is bad at this. I know some of you are there, and my contention is, will be, always has been, will be, with respect to play calling. Like, give me an example of a play call that you don't like so we can talk about it, because a lot of times maybe you don't know what the play call is. You and I don't know what the play call is, where the ball was supposed to go. Was it executed properly? There's a lot of nuance that goes into it. And sometimes you run something early in the game to set something up late in the game off that action. So here's the problem I do have. The problem I do have is if Brian Kelly is meddling during the game. You spent all week getting your plan together, and you go into the game, and the coordinator is orchestrating this symphony. It would be so difficult. I mean, imagine, just use that analogy of a symphony. If you have the conductor in front of the symphony conducting this orchestra, and then someone bumps in the middle of the set and starts trying to coordinate the trombones. Well, that's going to be difficult to have flow. I think of it like a painter. A painter who is sitting there with a canvas and is flowing and has an idea in his or her mind's eye of what they want it to look like, and then someone else comes in with a brush and starts painting. Well, now you've disrupted the whole flow. That's what I have a problem with. And we did see that before with Les Miles. Now, I hesitate to bring that up because I don't want anybody to like run off the road or think that that's where LSU's heading. But that was a problem. Now, Les didn't call the plays, but Les would give, let's say, very strong suggestions. For example, I want to run the ball to the right side here. Now, he didn't call the play, but he's basically he's taken the play sheet for the offensive coordinator and narrowed it down much smaller. Or, hey, I want to make sure 17 gets the ball here, or whatever. Well, now you've taken the full play arsenal and pared it down dramatically. You get to pick the play, you get to call the play, but you only get to call from this section of the play sheet. And I just think that we don't have great evidence of that working. So if Brian Kelly wants to call the plays, okay, call the plays. Let Joe Sloan work with the quarterbacks and let Brian Kelly call the plays, if that's what he wants to do. The problem I have is if this is what he's doing, because he had that play sheet on Saturday, he acknowledged he's being involved, he stopped short of saying to what length he's involved, but there are not a lot of examples of a head coach, holding the play sheet on the sideline while the offensive coordinator is calling the plays and the head coach is meddling. That's concerning. You have 2 games to go. We'll see if there's any marked improvement offensively. But look, Brian Kelly said this week that he wanted more balance in the offense. Well, you got it. I mean, as of when LSU kicked the field goal in the third quarter to go up 13-10, they had run 60 plays, 30 runs, 30 passes, 100% balance. You had more balance. You certainly did. And you ran 92 plays, and you controlled the ball for 42 minutes, and you scored 16 points. So you move the ball, you didn't convert. How much of that was meddling? I'll tell you one thing I didn't like at all. The very first drive of the game, LSU had a 4th and 1. They're going to go for it. Fine. I'm perfectly fine with you going for it. You're at the 40, at the 46-yard line. I'm perfectly fine. 4th and 1. You want to go for it? Go for it. Great. What I don't like is you had to burn a timeout. You had to burn a timeout before the 4th and 1 play. Why? Because you weren't set. Now, I'm to believe the reason you weren't set, you didn't have the decision made and the call ready to go. Why? Maybe it's because Brian Kelly was meddling at that point. You see what I'm talking about? Like, that's where you start to run into these issues. Instead of just having a coordinator dictating flow and tempo and going, now he's got to stop and check. Or now his thought process is being interrupted. Or Brian Kelly's calling this play, or has hesitated on the decision. Functionally, you start to have a lot of issues. The old adage of there's too many cooks in the kitchen. It kind of feels like that. So there's 2 games to go, and we'll find out how it starts to materialize over these next 2 games. But that got me very uneasy hearing that from Brian Kelly after the game on Saturday night. All right, it is Locked on LSU. So speaking of the next 2 games, what do you want to see? Brian Kelly gave a little bit of an insight of what he's expecting from his team over the next 2 weeks. And I have what I would like to see. We'll talk about it next. Locked on LSU, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy, and our friends over at 5 Hour Energy know that being a passionate football fan isn't just a hobby, it's a way of life. It takes a lot of energy to power through all-day tailgates, touchdowns, celebrations, or an agonizing second overtime, or an agonizing loss to Florida, which is why they created Stan the Fan 5 Hour Energy Shot with a special flavor called Fan Fuel. The energy shot made just for super fans like us, the fans who are first in the parking lot, who are the last to leave. So make sure you grab some 5 Hour Energy before Diego Pavia and the Vanderbilt Commodores invade Tiger Stadium this weekend. You're going to want to have plenty of it. So 5 Hour Energy knows no matter what team you root for, being a fan requires heart, soul, and a whole lot of energy. Whether you're prepping for the big tailgate or ironing your jersey, your game day to-do list is always a mile long. That's why the limited edition Stan the Fan 5 Hour Energy Shot is here to help keep you fueled throughout the season. What's your fan fuel this week? Whatever it is, do it with a 5 Hour Energy. Available at 5hourenergy.com, shipped nationwide. One of the big questions I think we all are wondering right now is, with all of your goals really off of the table, you can't make it to the college football playoff, you can't make it to Atlanta for the SEC championship, you can't win 10 games now, all the things that have been stated. What do you really have to play for? And that's something that Brian Kelly was asked after the game on Saturday.
Well, it's going to point out those that are not fighters. So we're going to put guys on the field that want to fight, and they want to do everything they do to correct where we are right now. And that is struggling with consistent execution. And I've pointed out a number of times, negative plays, inability to finish off drives in the end zone, and then the explosive plays on defense. They're pretty consistent now. I think we've seen them enough to know what clearly we have to be better at as coaches and players.
Well, he did mention we're going to find the 22 guys that want to fight. And I have a thought on the 22 guys, at least some of them, that I want to see a lot of over these final 2 weeks. But Brian Kelly was asked to elaborate a bit more.
Well, you know, this is really a simple exercise of, do you want to fight or not? You know, do you want to fight and take responsibility as coaches and players that we're not playing well and we're struggling right now? So it's life. It's a myriad of things, but it's a reflection of what life's about. There's a rough spot here that we have to fight through, and we got to do it together. So if you're not a thumb pointer, if you're not somebody that's saying, I'm going to work and continue to work to be better, then we don't have a place for you in the last couple of weeks. But if you want to fight and you want to keep working to get better, then we're going to be alongside of you. But at the end of the day, it's about overcoming adversity and fighting through these last 2 games that are at home that we desperately want to win.
I'm curious how how sincere he is. I don't have any reason to believe he's not being sincere, just to be clear. But if he is, because listen, there's a lot of pressure on coaches to win. All right, the pressure right now has ratcheted up on Brian Kelly more so than it's been his entire time at LSU, and he's got to go win. So he wants to play the guys that are going to best help him win. But what if the guys that are there to best help him win aren't the guys, as he said, that are thumb pointers? By thumb pointers, of course, he means like pointing your thumb at yourself, like instead of finger pointer or thumb pointer. You understand? If you're watching, you just got the visual. But look at what happened this past weekend. Two of your better defensive players are Braden Swinson and Sage Ryan. And I know there's a lot of LSU fans who like to dump on Sage Ryan. That's just he's been a convenient whipping boy for LSU's fans' attention. Sage Ryan was the third highest graded player defensively. His coverage grade was a 73. His tackling grade was a 77. His overall grade was a 67, courtesy of Pro Football Focus. And he is consistently one of your highest graded defensive players because he's playing his natural position. It's just one of those things where because you all have convinced yourself, not all of you, but some of you have convinced yourself that Sage Ryan's not a bad player or is a bad player, then you look for validation. You look for confirmation of that opinion. You don't necessarily look for information. So, and I've talked plenty about Sage Ryan. I don't mean this to be a tangent about Sage Ryan. He played out of position for 3 years. He's finally in his natural position. He's playing well. He's not a great player. He's not an All-American or All-Conference player, but he's one of your better players in the secondary. But Sage Ryan and Braden Swinson didn't start the game because of Brian Kelly wouldn't elaborate more on it, but a coach's decision. So we all assume that that's discipline. Well, that's concerning. But was it not a full half suspension or a full game suspension because you need the guys? Maybe. So how much is he willing, honestly, to stay true to that if there are guys that aren't completely bought in here in these final 2 weeks? I'll tell you what I want to see. And again, Brian Kelly doesn't have the luxury of just rolling it out there with some young guys the next 2 weeks and let the results be what they may. He's got to win games. So I understand that. He's going to put the players on the field that are going to best help him win. But I want to see the young guys. I know what Jordan Gilbert and Sage Ryan are at safety. I want to see what Deshaun Spears and Kylan Jackson are. I know what Major Burns is at the star. I want to see what Javon Toviano can be. I know we've seen a lot from some of these running backs. Juwan Johnson started to see more snaps the past couple of weeks. I want to see him get more involved. I know they like Paris Shand and Gio Pius on the interior, and those guys have been really consistent for you. I want to see more of Dominant McKinley. You have a short rotation at linebacker. What if we see more of Devon Keys and Xavier Atkins? What if we get to see more of Gabe Relaford here over the final 2 games? Relaford started in place of Braden Swinson. I'm not saying take Braden Swinson off the field. I think he's your best defensive player. But suffice to say, there's an opportunity over these next 2 weeks to see more of some of those young guys where you have the opportunity to start building toward next year. Now, you got to win the game. But if you're actually developing players, as we've heard is the mantra, recruit and develop, well, then the guys who maybe saw some playing time in the first month of the season who have seen their snaps wane, like Deshaun Spears primarily, wouldn't it stand to reason that over the 6-8 weeks since then that he's developed more and should be more capable of playing and giving you key reps? I'd kind of like to see that here over the next couple of games. But he's right in that you're going to find out who wants to be there, because this would normally be the time in the portal era where you would start to see guys opt out, go to the draft, hit the portal, whatever it is, now that your goals are off the table. So we'll see how much buy-in they have over these next 2 weeks. And it's not going to be easy because you heard Brian Kelly say there, the 2 things they know where they're struggling: finishing drives and on offense and preventing the big plays on defense. Well, Diego Pavia coming in from Vanderbilt is exceptional at the thing that is your Achilles heel, a mobile quarterback who's dynamic and make plays. And they make chunk plays. And the flip side of it is, while Oklahoma has really struggled offensively, their defensive front 7 is really good. And when the field shrinks, and if you can pressure Garrett Nussmeier, it's going to make it even more difficult for LSU offensively to try to finish drives, which is what they've struggled with. So the next 2 teams you play the teams don't do both of those things well, but Vanderbilt does one of them well, and Oklahoma does one of them well, which can create very uncomfortable situations for LSU in these final 2 weeks. So he's right. We'll find out who's strapping it on for Old State U and seeing if they can go find a way to get a couple of wins here and finish the season strong. Okay, Pro Football Focus did the heavy lifting. What did they find from the Florida game? It's actually very telling, and it's not going to surprise you. We'll talk about it next. Locked on LSU, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Today's show is also brought to you by Game Time. Y'all, if you want to be in that number when LSU takes on Vanderbilt in Tiger Stadium or Oklahoma around the holiday weekend, make sure you check out Game Time. You know, at Game Time, you'll always get the best price. It's the Game Time guarantee. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. They also offer job loss assurance. So if you lose your job and you need a refund, Game Time's got you covered. They have event cancellation protection. It automatically gives you a full refund for events that are canceled and not rescheduled. They have 24-hour returns for 24-hour returns guarantee. You can return your tickets within 24 hours from the time of the purchase for a full credit to your Game Time account. No questions asked. It's just several of the reasons why Game Time is the best ticketing app that you'll find. Here's what you do. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem with the code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. We always like to wrap up here after the game week with the Pro Football Focus grades, and it's pretty telling. I said this won't surprise you, but one thing might. On a day where LSU allowed 7 sacks, you probably wouldn't think that 2 offensive linemen were your highest graded players, but that's exactly what happened. Will Campbell was your highest graded player with a 74.8 grade, and your second highest graded player was Emory Jones at 73.5. Their pass blocking grades were outstanding. Campbell, 83.3, Jones, 84.4. And you might look at that and roll your eyes and think, how in the world could LSU give up 7 sacks and the top 2 graded players by Pro Football Focus are offensive linemen? Well, look on the interior, and that tells you the story. Your lowest graded player was Chris Hilton. Your second lowest graded player was Paul Mabenga. His pass blocking grade was a 36.6. DJ Chester graded out at a 58. His pass blocking grade was a 59.2. Josh Williams, another rough day in pass protection with a pass blocking grade of 33.2. Tyree Adams, for what it's worth, who replaced Miles Frazier when Frazier went down with injury, Frazier's pass blocking grade was an exceptional 83.9, and Adams, who replaced him, was at 83.3. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure this out. Your problem is at center and left guard. DJ Chester has struggled a lot this year. Garrett Dellinger was your highest graded offensive lineman at the time of his injury. With Dellinger going out, you have replaced your highest graded offensive lineman with now your lowest graded offensive lineman in Paul Mabenga. And what's more is you have put your lowest graded offensive lineman next to DJ Chester, who had been your lowest graded offensive lineman. So now, as quarterbacks will always tell you, It's not pressure from the edge that bothers them. They can always step up. It's pressure right in their face, blowing up the launch pad. You took out Garrett Dellinger, who's exceptional, and made up for a lot of the shortcomings that DJ Chester had. You take Garrett Dellinger out, and now you've weakened 2 spots because it lessened the effectiveness of DJ Chester. And that's what happened on Saturday, unfortunately for LSU. Will Campbell allowed 1 sack and 58 pass protection snaps. It was the only pressure he allowed, 1 pressure in 58 snaps. Emory Jones allowed 2 hurries, no sacks, had an 84.4 grade in pass protection. The interior of your line, the young players on your line, were your problem, unfortunately. Zy Alexander and Sage Ryan were your next 2 highest graded players either side of the ball. Alexander has been outstanding. He was targeted 7 times, only allowed 2 receptions for 16 yards. Sage Ryan was only targeted 1 time. He broke up the only pass that went his way. And his tackling grade was good, but he only made 1 tackle. Florida just wasn't on the field very much. The odd thing here is that your lowest graded player on either side of the ball was Whit Weeks with a 35.9 grade. Parrish Shand, Chris Hilton, Ashton Stamps, and then Paul Mabenga followed as far as the lowest grades. Whit Weeks played a lot of coverage. 22 of his 45 snaps were in coverage, and his coverage grade was a 33.3. Only made 3 tackles and missed 1. So if you have 4 opportunities at a tackle and you make 3 of them and you miss 1 of them, your tackle grade isn't going to be great. So it just wasn't a great day for LSU all the way around, which is so bizarre because you moved the ball up and down the field. You ran 92 plays, but you didn't finish drives, and you gave up chunk plays on defense, and that cost you a game that you probably should have won. So the Tigers will have to regroup and get back after it against Vanderbilt this coming weekend. We'll get you ready for it all week right here. We appreciate you for being there. As we continue to remind you, one of the best ways to help us grow is to leave your comments below. So please leave your comments if you're watching on YouTube or on podcast. If you're on podcast, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Rate us, leave a review if you're on YouTube. Please subscribe to the channel, smash that like button, hit the bell so you're notified whenever we post a new video. And let a friend know if they love the Tigers. We got you here every single day for Locked on LSU, your team every day.